My sister Lydia once called me the ugly grad in front of our entire family. My father laughed, my stepmother smirked, and the word clung to me like a scar I couldn't erase. That night, I packed my things and disappeared. For 11 years, they thought I was gone for good, erased from their perfect picture. But I wasn't gone. I was rebuilding. And when I walked into Lydia's wedding, no one recognized me. Not until her husband leaned closer and asked, "Do you know her?" I smiled. "More than you think." Silence swallowed the room. My earliest memories weren't of birthday cakes or warm embraces. They were of responsibility, of carrying burdens I was far too young to carry. When my mother died, I was 15, and my father remarried only a year later. His new wife, Margaret, swept into our home like a storm. Sharp, demanding, always watching. She adored my younger sister Lydia, showering her with attention and expensive gifts, while I was left with chores, bills, and silence. I told myself it was temporary, that if I worked harder, studied better, maybe one day my father would look at me with pride instead of indifference. But pride never came. What came instead was more sacrifice. I worked nights at the diner, the grease from the kitchen clinging to my hair so Lydia could have piano lessons and the best clothes. When Lydia wanted to attend an exclusive summer camp, I gave up the money I'd saved for a school trip abroad. My father didn't thank me. Margaret didn't notice. Lydia barely acknowledged it. She simply smiled, flaunted her new experiences, and let me fade into the background. Still, I tried to believe my sacrifices mattered. Maybe, I thought, family always evened out in the end. Maybe someday Lydia would remember what I'd done for her, but that someday never came. At school, I was the quiet one, the serious one. My grades were near perfect, but nobody cared about that when Lydia walked into a room. She was radiant, the kind of beauty people paused for. When she smiled, teachers bent rules, boys tripped over themselves, and even adults seemed to rearrange the world around her. I used to watch her move through life with such ease and wonder if I was invisible or if she was simply blinding. The truth of my place in the family struck me hardest on my high school graduation. I had worked for years, sacrificed sleep, food, and childhood to get to that stage. Standing there in my plain gown, holding my diploma, I looked for my family in the audience. Lydia was there, dressed better than most of the graduates, her hair perfect, her makeup glowing under the lights. She leaned to my father and whispered something. He chuckled. Margaret smirked. A moment later, the words reached me, carried by a cruel breeze of laughter. "Ugly grad." It was Lydia's voice, sharp and mocking, and the rest of my family joined in. I stood on stage, every muscle stiff, every nerve begging me to cry, but I didn't. I clenched my teeth and forced my eyes to stay dry. I would not let them see me break. I would not let them win. The applause of strangers filled the auditorium, but for me, it sounded like pity. That night, I packed my few belongings in silence and closed the door to the house I'd kept together for years. Leaving didn't mean they missed me. Lydia thrived. With Margaret's help, she attended the best university. She posted pictures of parties, vacations, and dresses I could never afford. My father stood beside her in every photo, beaming. My face was nowhere to be seen. One day, when I foolishly checked the family album that had once been ours, I saw the proof of my erasure. Pictures of me had been ripped out, literally torn, leaving jagged white spaces. I stared at those blank spots, my absence louder than any insult, and Lydia only climbed higher. At 21, she caught the attention of Nathaniel Whitmore, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the state. The newspapers wrote about them as if they were royalty. My father and Margaret preened like they had raised a princess, though it was my labor, my silence, that had given Lydia the space to become who she was. She paraded her new life proudly as though the past had never existed. One evening, desperate to retrieve something from the old house, I slipped into the living room where the photo albums were kept. I flipped the pages slowly, searching for any trace of myself. But all that was left were Lydia's glowing portraits, Lydia's achievements, Lydia's perfect smile. It was as though I had never existed. I was a ghost in my own family story. Just as I was leaving, I heard her voice behind me, low and venomous. "She'll never belong here." My father didn't answer. Margaret didn't argue. The words hung in the air like a curse. Lydia believed it, and so did they. I stepped out of that house with nothing but the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I told myself I was done. I would never look back. Yet the sting of Lydia's whisper followed me into every sleepless night. And still, I waited. I waited for the day the balance would shift. 11 years passed. 11 years of silence, of distance, of becoming someone they would never expect. I had almost convinced myself that my family no longer existed, that their voices could no longer reach me. Then one morning, tucked inside a stack of business mail, I found it. A white envelope, thick, embossed with golden letters. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but when I pulled the card free, the words sliced through me like glass. The Whitmore Hayes wedding. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Hayes, my family name, bound forever to Lydia's future. Beneath the elegant print, the invitation listed Nathaniel Whitmore and Lydia Hayes in ornate script, like royalty-inviting subjects. At the very bottom, my name was printed, Ms. Clara Hayes. No mention of sister. No acknowledgement that I was blood, that I had raised her like a second mother. Just a polite afterthought, a stranger on paper. I almost tossed it into the trash. But then I noticed the note folded inside. My father's handwriting, shaky, hurried. "Clara, we expect you to come. Sit quietly. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us." Embarrass them? After all the years I scrubbed dishes, gave up dreams, kept the house from falling apart, I was the embarrassment? My hands trembled as I held the card. For a moment, the weight of the past pressed down on me, and I felt that same teenage girl who had stood on the graduation stage, mocked as ugly grad. But something shifted inside me. My chest no longer caved under the shame. My lips curved into a bitter smile. What would you do if your family erased you? Walk away? Or show up? I decided I would go. The day of the wedding glittered like something out of a magazine. The Whitmore estate was transformed into a palace of flowers and chandeliers. Valets in black suits ushered guests from sleek cars, laughter rippling through the warm summer air. I walked in alone, head high, dressed not extravagantly but elegantly. A long black dress, simple pearls, nothing to scream for attention, yet enough to remind them that I was no longer the forgotten girl they thought they had buried. Inside, the hall was packed with people of influence, senators, CEOs, socialites. Names I had seen in headlines shook hands with Lydia and Nathaniel as if greeting royalty. And there, at the grand center of it all, Lydia stood like a queen, her gown shimmering under the lights. She had always been beautiful, but now, with money and status stitched into every thread, she looked untouchable. I searched for my name on the seating chart displayed at the entrance. Row after row of polished plaques with Whitmore and distinguished guest. Finally, I found it. Ms. Clara Hayes. Not near family, not even near acquaintances. At the very bottom, near the restrooms, beside staff entrances. A place for someone who didn't matter. The humiliation was deliberate. I knew Lydia's hand in it. She hadn't just wanted me present, she wanted me present and beneath her heel. As I moved toward the lonely table, eyes followed. Whispers trailed behind. "Is that her? The sister? Why does she look so different?" The perfume of judgment filled the room. Still, I walked slowly, deliberately, refusing to bow my head. The ceremony began with grandeur. Vows were exchanged, kisses sealed with applause, champagne poured like water. I sat quietly in my shadowed corner, invisible in the middle of a spectacle. For a brief second, I wondered if I should have stayed away. But then Lydia saw me. Our eyes locked, a flicker of recognition, then disdain. She smiled, a cruel, perfect smile, and raised her glass. "This," she announced loudly during the toasts, "is my sister Clara. She tried, but never made it." The laughter that followed was sharp, merciless. Guests chuckled into their glasses. eyes flicking toward me with curiosity and scorn. My father didn't defend me. Margaret didn't flinch. They all let the humiliation hang there as if it was natural, expected. I held my glass, knuckles white, but I did not break. Not this time. Then Nathaniel, tall and polished, leaned closer to Lydia with a smirk. His gaze slid toward me, lingering longer than I expected. Finally, he asked the question that cut the air. "You know her?" The room hushed, waiting for Lydia to laugh again. Instead, I stood, the silence wrapping around me like armor. My lips curved, calm and unshaken. "More than you think." The music stopped. Forks clinked against plates. Heads turned sharply. In that instant, every eye in the room was on me, the forgotten sister, the erased daughter, and for the first time, they were the ones who didn't know what came next. The silence after my words lingered like smoke. More than you think. The music had stopped, but the tension in the room had its own rhythm now, a drumbeat no one could escape. Lydia's smile faltered for the first time that evening. Nathaniel's confident expression cracked, his brow furrowing as if he'd stumbled into a story he hadn't been told. Then the ballroom doors opened. Heads turned as a man entered with quiet authority, his presence cutting through the chatter like a blade. Tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit, his gaze sweeping the room with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Whispers rippled. "That's Elias Ward." Elias Ward, CEO of a multinational tech empire, the kind of name that appeared in headlines and business magazines. To this crowd, he was untouchable, someone people angled to impress. To me, he was something else entirely. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I recognized him instantly. He had been the struggling college student sitting 2 rows behind me in economics, living off instant noodles and working late shifts at the campus library. Back then, no one noticed him, but I did. I had slipped him notes from class when he couldn't afford the textbooks, shared meals when he had none, lent him money I barely had myself. And now here he was, walking toward me with a steadiness that silenced the entire hall. He stopped at my table, ignoring the glittering guests and Lydia's wide-eyed stare. Without hesitation, he extended his hand to me. "This woman," Elias said clearly, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "saved me once. I owe her everything." The crowd froze. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses hovered in trembling fingers. He wasn't speaking in metaphor. He meant it. Lydia's jaw slackened. My father blinked rapidly as if his eyes refused to believe what they saw. Margaret tried to smile, but the corners of her lips twitched nervously. And Nathaniel's eyes hardened, his knuckles whitening around the stem of his wine glass. Because Elias Ward wasn't just a guest, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a majority shareholder in the Whitmore Group, the very empire Nathaniel was poised to inherit. The realization rippled through the room like lightning. Lydia's face drained of color. Nathaniel's confident mask crumbled, the easy charm evaporating into something far colder. Elias didn't wait for them to recover. He tightened his grip on my hand, guiding me to stand beside him. Then he raised his glass. "To Clara," he declared, his tone resolute, daring anyone to oppose him. "The reason I stand here today. Without her, there would be no Elias Ward as you know him." The hall fell into absolute silence. No laughter, no whispers, only stunned stillness. Even the string quartet faltered, their bows frozen midair. I felt every gaze on me, their eyes calculating, reevaluating, scrambling to understand who I truly was. My throat tightened. For a fleeting second, memories rushed back. My tiny apartment, nights skipping meals so I could lend Elias money, long hours in the library encouraging him not to drop out. I had never thought of those moments as extraordinary. They had been simple kindnesses. And yet, here he stood, placing me on a pedestal I had never been given by my own blood. It was overwhelming. For years, I had been erased, mocked, forgotten. Now, in one declaration, the narrative had shifted. Lydia forced a laugh, too sharp, too brittle. "Oh, come now," she said, her voice strained. My sister has always been kind. I suppose we just never mentioned it. Her smile quivered like glass about to shatter, but no one believed her. The guests leaned toward each other, whispering behind raised hands. She's with Elias Ward. She's the one who helped him? The tide was turning, and Lydia knew it. Nathaniel's face darkened. He leaned down to whisper something into Lydia's ear, but she flinched as if his words cut. His jaw clenched. The empire he thought he commanded suddenly had another master in the room, and that master was standing at my side. For the first time that night, I felt power. Not loud or vengeful, but steady, grounding. And yet, beneath it, I felt a sting of emotion I hadn't expected. Gratitude, yes, but also sorrow. Sorrow for the girl I used to be, the one who had begged for scraps of acknowledgement from her family. She would never get it, not truly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My hands trembled slightly, but I squeezed Elias's arm to steady myself. I wasn't alone anymore. Across the room, Nathaniel abruptly set his glass down and strode away from the table. He pulled out his phone, his voice low and sharp as he barked into it. His posture was tense, his shoulders squared, as though he were preparing for a war he hadn't anticipated. The war had already begun. The air in the ballroom felt heavier after Nathaniel slipped out to take his call. Conversations had dimmed to murmurs, glances darting between me and Elias, as if everyone was trying to reassemble the puzzle pieces of a story they hadn't known existed. My family stood stiff, Margaret clutching her glass, my father shifting uncomfortably, Lydia's smile frozen in place. Elias lifted his glass again, his eyes never leaving mine. Some of you might wonder why I would say I owe everything to Clara Hayes. You see her now? Elegant, composed, but you don't know the girl she once was, the girl who changed my life. A hush fell deeper across the hall. Lydia's forced smile cracked slightly, her hands tightening on Nathaniel's arm. Elias continued, his voice calm but firm. I was a student with nothing. I couldn't pay for textbooks, couldn't afford more than a pack of noodles for the week. People ignored me, professors overlooked me. Clara didn't. She lent me her notes, shared her meals, slipped me $20 when she had barely enough for herself. She told me not to give up when I was ready to quit. Whispers spread like wildfire. Guests who had sneered minutes ago now stared at me differently, curious, calculating, perhaps even respectful. I kept my chin high, though inside my chest tightened. The memories hit raw. Nights I had gone hungry. Days I'd worked double shifts to cover Lydia's luxuries, the loneliness that wrapped me when I had no one. I told myself, Elias added, his gaze steady, that if I ever succeeded, I would find her again. And now, here she stands, not as the girl who once saved me, but as a woman whose brilliance the world has already noticed, though perhaps her family chose not to. Gasps rippled. Lydia's expression wavered. My father's eyes darted to Margaret, who turned pale. Because Elias wasn't lying. The truth was, after leaving home, I had clawed my way up with nothing but scholarship letters and relentless grit. I had studied abroad, built networks, and eventually shaped myself into a strategic consultant trusted by corporations across Europe and America. Recognition had come quietly, lists like Top 30 Under 30, interviews tucked into the back pages of magazines, advisory roles few people outside the business world would notice. But I hadn't flaunted any of it. Not once had I called my father to brag, not once had I mailed a clipping home, and so my family had stayed ignorant, content to think I'd vanished into mediocrity, until now. A guest near the front whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "She's on Forbes. I've seen her name." Others pulled out their phones, their screens glowing as they searched, confirming the truth Elias had dropped like a bomb. I turned my head slowly, catching Lydia's eyes. She was pale, her grip on her champagne flute slipping. When she heard Elias's next words, the glass shattered against the floor. "Perhaps Nathaniel should know," Elias said evenly, "that Clara also holds shares in the Whitmore Group, a silent acquisition. months ago. She is, in fact, one of his partners. The room erupted. Gasps, hurried whispers, nervous laughter that didn't quite hide the panic. My father's mouth opened in shock. Margaret muttered something under her breath, trembling. And Lydia... Lydia's face turned ghostly, her body swaying slightly as though the ground itself had tilted beneath her. The sound of her glass hitting marble echoed like thunder. Nathaniel re-entered at that moment, phone still in his hand. He froze when he saw Lydia's expression, then the broken glass at her feet. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something that wasn't disdain. Fear. Later that night, word spread fast. Nathaniel's board members, alerted to the scene, began their own digging. Files surfaced quickly. They found me listed in top 30 under 30, my consulting firm linked to companies their empire had tried and failed to win. They saw the contracts I had brokered in Europe, the policy work I had done quietly with senators, the networks they never dreamed I had built. My father sat in stunned silence as the pieces came together. At last, he whispered hoarsely to Margaret, "We cast her out, and she became this. We disowned a genius." Margaret couldn't meet his eyes. That night, my phone lit up with Lydia's number. Again and again she called. I let them ring. Finally, I answered once, only to hear her trembling voice. "Clara, I was wrong. I didn't know. Please, forgive me." I held the silence for a long moment, letting her desperation hang. Then I whispered, steady, cold, "Too late." And I ended the call. The fallout didn't stop there. By dawn, an internal email from the Whitmore Group leaked across the internet, and with it, confirmation. I had purchased a controlling stake in one of Nathaniel's subsidiaries, giving me influence he hadn't anticipated. The empire he thought was his alone now had my name written into its foundation, and the cracks in his world had only begun. The aftermath of that night unraveled faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, the Whitmore Group's stock had dipped 5%, a ripple that shook the polished foundations of their empire. Rumors spread that board members questioned Nathaniel's judgment, whispering about his lack of foresight in underestimating me. Contracts that once seemed guaranteed began slipping through their fingers. A major deal in Europe collapsed when Elias Ward announced he was reconsidering partnerships. At first, Nathaniel tried to hold it together. He smiled at press conferences, reassured investors with the practiced charm of a man born to power. But behind closed doors, the mask cracked. In a heated board meeting, when reports of another lost contract came in, he slammed his fist against the mahogany table so hard the water glasses trembled. "This is your fault," he spat at Lydia, his voice sharp enough to cut the air. "You paraded her humiliation, you mocked her, and now we are bleeding because of it. Stupid! How could you be so stupid?" Lydia flinched as if he had struck her. For the first time, her perfect image wavered. She had been adored her entire life, shielded from consequence. But Nathaniel was not her doting family. He was a man whose empire was cracking, and he needed someone to blame. I wasn't in the room, but the reports reached me quickly. Elias, ever composed, had already made his position clear. "Unless changes are made at the top, I'll withdraw my stake." His words reverberated through financial circles. Everyone knew what that meant. The Whitmores without Elias Ward were fragile prey. And yet, I did nothing. I didn't call, didn't push, didn't demand. I didn't need to. Their arrogance was a rot, spreading faster than any vengeance I could design. They had built their kingdom on vanity and greed. Now they were watching it sink beneath them. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I had begged for acknowledgement. Now I only needed silence, and they destroyed themselves, but the cruelest twist was yet to come. One evening, Lydia stumbled upon an old yearbook Nathaniel had kept hidden in his study. Inside were notes and pictures, and a single folded page with my name scrawled in his handwriting. A confession. He had admired me in college before Lydia ever entered his orbit. A crush he had buried, never confessed, but it was there. Undeniable. undeniable enough to poison what little remained of their fragile marriage. The discovery shattered her. Word spread among our extended family, too. Some of my cousins and aunts reached out, voices soft, apologetic. "We didn't know, Clara. We thought you were just gone." My father sat in silence, eyes red, weighed down by regret. At last, he muttered to Margaret, "We wronged her, and now she stands taller than all of us." But Margaret remained as sharp as ever. "She'll never forgive us," she said coldly. And perhaps she was right. Lydia grew increasingly isolated. Friends she once boasted to no longer returned her calls. Invitations dried up. She reached for me instead, her desperation bleeding through late-night texts and unanswered voicemails. "Clara, please, I need your help. They're turning on me. I can't do this alone." I read her words in silence, my chest tightening against a storm of old wounds. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I let myself cry. No one saw, no one knew. Tears rolled down my face as memories returned. Lydia as a child clinging to me after nightmares, Lydia laughing as I pushed her on the swings, Lydia's small hand in mine the day we buried our mother. For a moment, I wished things could have been different, that she hadn't chosen cruelty, that I hadn't been forced to armor my heart. But wishing doesn't rewrite history. The next morning, a letter arrived. Lydia's handwriting, shaky, smudged in places as though written in tears. She begged me for forgiveness, reminded me of childhood bonds, pleaded for one last chance. I unfolded it slowly, read every word, then folded it back again. My hands trembled, but not from indecision. I knew my answer. With steady fingers, I tore the paper in half, then in quarters, then in pieces so small they could never be taped back together. It was over. The shredded pieces of Lydia's letter lay scattered across the hotel desk like remnants of a war I had never asked to fight. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my past begin to lift. It didn't vanish. It never could. But it loosened its grip, and I could breathe freely. I had carried their judgments, their cruelty, their abandonment for so long. Now I understood. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. Elias found me on the balcony later that morning, his expression steady, calm as the man he had become. "It's done," he said simply, placing a hand on the railing beside mine. The city stretched before us, glass towers glinting in the sun, a reflection of the future neither of us could have imagined back when we were broke students, barely surviving. "Yes," I answered. My voice didn't shake. "It's done." We stood there for a while, not speaking, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like the pause after a storm when the world feels washed clean. For the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow. I wasn't a forgotten sister, or a discarded daughter, or the ugly grad. I was Clara Hayes, woman, survivor, strategist, partner. Elias offered more than comfort. He offered partnership. "I don't just want you beside me in this business," he said. "I want you beside me in everything." There was no grand gesture, no rehearsed speech, just a quiet honesty that felt more powerful than any vow. I took his hand, not because I needed saving, but because for once, I wanted to walk forward with someone who saw me as I was, not as my family had tried to paint me. And yet, even as I looked toward this new beginning, I carried a piece of the old life with me. Inside my wallet, tucked behind business cards and sleek metal banknotes, was a worn photograph. Me, Lydia, and our father on a sunny day long before Margaret entered the picture. Our hair was tangled by the wind, our smiles unguarded, our hands clasped together. I kept it not out of weakness, but as proof that once, however briefly, love had lived there. That evening, alone in my room, I held the photo in my hand. My reflection in the glass was different now, stronger, sharper, unshakable. I traced the outline of Lydia's young face with my fingertip and whispered into the silence, "Thank you for making me stronger." The world outside moved on quickly, but inside the Whitmore household, fractures widened into chasms. Nathaniel and Lydia's marriage unraveled under the weight of humiliation and suspicion. Nathaniel never forgave her for the scene at the wedding, nor for the discovery that he had once harbored feelings for me. The empire, already weakened, began to split apart, board members turning their backs, allies withdrawing. Lydia's beauty could not shield her now. Invitations stopped coming, doors closed in her face. Friends melted away as quickly as they had gathered. The world that had once bent to her smile stood indifferent. She was left to stare at her own reflection, realizing it no longer granted her power. My father aged overnight. His hair, already streaked with gray, turned almost white within months. Regret hollowed him out, the guilt of abandoning me etched into the lines of his face. I didn't go back, didn't visit, but I heard whispers from relatives, how he walked slower, spoke softer, seemed to be carrying a ghost. Margaret remained sharp-tongued, but even she couldn't deny the emptiness that grew in their home. Some family members reached for me, offering apologies wrapped in too late sympathy. I accepted their words, but never returned to the fold. I didn't need to. I had built a family of my own, not by blood, but by choice, by loyalty, by love. And so I moved forward, not with a shout, not with vengeance carved into the air, but with quiet resilience. My revenge wasn't fire or fury. It was standing tall in boardrooms where my name commanded respect. It was walking through cities with Elias beside me, no longer invisible, no longer erased. It was building a life so bright that those who had once laughed at me couldn't even look without wincing. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's living a life so radiant, so unshakably whole, that the people who tried to break you can do nothing but watch from the shadows. And that was the justice I chose.